Let's turn now to talking about Islam. When you hear the term Islam, what are some of the things that come immediately to your mind? Middle East, violence, 9/11, jihad, Sharia law. All right, Sharia law, prayer, Mecca, pillars, pilgrimage. All right, the pilgrimage. Where do you get a lot of your? Before this class, where did you get a lot of what you thought about Islam? From the news. All right, from the news media. History class. Okay, maybe the history class. All right, maybe parents or other people you know. And so we get a lot of impressions, and of course in the West we are tend to focus on the violent aspects of Islam, which are certainly there, and we'll talk about some of that and some of those expressions and where they come from, what's the purpose behind them, what's the goal. But I don't want to start off with us thinking that that's all there is to Islam. There's certainly, just like in any religion, there are those that would express themselves violently, and then there are others who would say, well, that's not what my religion is about. The other thing to keep in mind as well, as we talk about this, we'll be talking about things like the prayers and the pillars, as people mentioned, pilgrimage. Things that Muslims are supposed to do. Well, just like there are cultural Christians and cultural Jews, right? People who use that label but aren't that devoted or active in the religion, there are cultural Muslims as well. In some of the Middle Eastern countries especially, you see a lot of cultural Muslims in the sense that they are they would identify as Muslims, but they might not be the most devout to the religion, just like any religion. And so while we're going to be talking about some things, we always keep in the back of your mind there's always that exception, right? Just as there's the exception to the violence, violence is the exception to Islam, there's that exception of people are not as committed as perhaps other people would expect them to be. Let's start off with an overview like we did when we were talking about Judaism. The term Islam, the term for this religion, could be translated in English as submission. Essentially, the idea is that in the practice of Islam, you are submitting yourself to God. In many respects, Muslims look at this as an act or a general practice that has been done throughout history. And so, just like Buddhists would reinterpret some aspects of Hinduism, Christians would reinterpret aspects of Judaism, so would Muslims reinterpret a lot of Jewish and Christian history, saying that even before Muhammad, there were people who submitted, there were people who practiced Islam. But it's also important to note from an Islamic viewpoint that only human beings can Islam. Islam is a choice. We think, of course, of in the West, in our approach to history, forced conversions and other aspects of force which occurred. But essentially, most Muslims would say to submit to God is a choice that needs to be made freely. A person who submits to God is known as a Muslim. Right? So one who practices Islam is a Muslim. I'll say it one more time. One who practices Islam is a Muslim. The reason I say that is that I will get on an exam somebody who's talking about what the Islams do. Right? The Islams do nothing. Right? The Muslims are the people who do things. Right? They're the people that worship. Right? So if you practice Islam, you are a Muslim. Islam, of course, is one of the monotheistic faiths, along with Judaism and Christianity, but is a very strict monotheism like Judaism. There is only one God. God has no partners, is the way the Quran puts it. And so they would look at Christianity as maybe practicing tritheism, it might be one way, or practicing what we might call a soft monotheism. I don't know that we necessarily, as Christians, should accept that terminology, but this is how it's distinguished between Islamic monotheism and Christian monotheism. Another important term in all of this, of course, is the term Allah, Arabic, simply translated as God. Most Muslims do not use Allah as God's personal name. It's just the word for God. It's the Arabic word for God. Many contemporary people would try to exoticize Islam or try to distance Christianity from Islam by emphasizing the worship of Allah or Allah as a false god, the moon god, etc. But Christians who speak Arabic use the term Allah for God as well. So in the saying of the Apostles' Creed, I believe in God the Father, the Almighty, in Arabic, of course, is the term Allah. So there's not that, there's not something special about the word Allah. It's just the Arabic word for God. Islam, of course, monotheistic, so there's that connection between Judaism and Christianity, but it is also an Abrahamic religion, another offshoot of the connecting with Abraham. And with that, there were a lot of connections between Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Belief in one God who created the universe, who rules the universe, who's beyond the universe, right? God doesn't exist within the universe, he's separate and apart. There's also a shared set of beliefs in angels, the importance of prophets, revelation, moral responsibility. But then we come to that question of, all right, so there's that historical connection, but is it the same God that Jews and Christians worship? Well, while on one hand we might say, that's a very simple question. On another look at it, it's a very complex question, and we'll talk more about that later on. But it's a question that has real consequences. Just recently, a professor at Wheaton College, I don't know if you've heard about this, an evangelical college in Illinois, thought that she would show solidarity with Muslims and wear hijab during the season of Christmas because of a lot of the anti-Muslim rhetoric that has been floating around. Well, she is a professor at an evangelical, so very conservative Christian institution, and she was relieved of her teaching duties, and they have actually begun the process of terminating her from employment. And a lot of what people pointed to that was problematic was not so much the wearing of hijab, which Christian women in Muslim-controlled countries often do because that's the law, but it was by calling Muslims brothers and sisters, and by also referring to them as worshiping the same God. And so it's not just kind of a theoretical question, but one that sometimes has very concrete consequences. But we'll talk about that later on. Another couple things to note about this connection between Judaism and Islam, especially this idea of Abrahamic religion. Arabic is very similar to Hebrew, and so Allah shares a similar development with the Hebrew word El, which is the word for God in Hebrew, or one of the words for God in Hebrew. And of course, Abraham himself is very important in the lineage of Islam. Though a lot of Muslims focus on Ishmael, Abraham's first son, versus Isaac, which is the important son for Judaism and Christianity. Within Islam are these individuals known as imams. And you might have heard that term before. Imams function similarly to the rabbis of Judaism. They are the scholars. They are not priests, like what you would see in Catholicism or early Israelite religion or Anglicanism or something like that. Instead, the Muslim imam is a preacher, a rabbi, someone who deals with the text of the Quran, the Holy Book, and interprets it for the people, or helps them make application in their lives. And so an imam is not a priest. And then finally, while we think of Islam as being a religion of the Arabs, Islam is actually a global religion. There are over 1.5 billion Muslims in the world. Only 20%, and it's actually probably less than that now, only 20% of them are Arabs. And so 80% of Muslims are not Arabs. Does anybody know what the largest Muslim country is? Indonesia is the largest Muslim country. And so we don't normally think about that. So unless you've seen that in the news or read it in the textbook, you don't think of that. But 1/3 of Muslims are found in Southeast Asia. It is a global religion. In fact, out of the top 10 countries, you have Indonesia, of course, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Nigeria make up the top 5, and then you have Egypt, Iran, Turkey, Algeria, and Morocco. And so you have African countries, you have Southeast Asian countries there, and then other countries that we would say, well, those are Middle Eastern countries. But we're only talking about 3 out of the top 10. And in fact, the top 10 countries represent 1 billion Muslims. And so you total all that together, more than half of Muslims live in those 10 countries. The rest of the countries make up the other 500 million. Projections are based on current trends of reproduction and all those, and population and other things like that, and spread, suggest that by 2050, the top 3 countries will be India, Pakistan, and Indonesia. So there'll be some sort of demographic change, but still making it a non-Arab religion more than it is an Arabic religion. Any questions or comments about that overview? Anything I need to clarify? Let's get into a little bit of the history. Although today, in modern times, Islam is largely not a religion of the Middle East or a religion of Arab makeup, the religion started in Arabia and was heavily shaped by a lot of the things going on in Arabia at the time. Prior to Islam, a lot of the focus was in what's now Saudi Arabia, but Arabia at the time, was on your tribal identity. Right? Your focus was on your extended family, families constituting a clan, several clans constituting a tribe. And that was where your identity was. Right? It was on your tribe. And how you thought of yourself and how you thought of others was based on what's the relationship of my tribe to this tribe, what is the relationship of my clan to this clan. Most of the people in Arabia at the time, we're talking about prior to the 7th century of the Common Era, the Christian era, most of them were polytheistic. They believed in the worship of, or practiced the worship of multitudes of gods. There were some monotheistic people in Arabia. Christians and Jews were present. And then there was a group of people known as Hanifs, or pious ones, who believed in a similar type of ethical monotheism. There is one God who expects people to behave in certain ways. Also, it's important to recognize that Arabia was not some place in the backwaters of the world, right, separated from society. No, it was focused around trading. A lot of people went through and went to Arabia to trade. In fact, during the time, right, the 7th century AD or CE, there was some war going on up in here in what is modern-day Iran that forced the Silk Route down through Arabia, right, in order to get to China. So It is a place where a lot of different cultures and people mingle together. It's not something separate or apart. As I said before, the way people were united was through kinship. And your individual identity, your individual rights were subordinated to those notions of tribal and family identity. Justice, of course, was guaranteed because of retaliation. And if you did something against somebody else's tribe, that tribe was coming after you. A lot of the key virtues were focused around things like protection of family members, loyalty of family, bravery in battle, but also hospitality and honor.